did music become your passion?
Oh man, I mean, some of my earliest memories revolve around music. When I was born in Prague, and what I remember from my sort of limited memory, because I left when I was 8 or 9 or so, was my grandmother, who actually lived in England at the time. She used to come and visit. At that time, you were unable to travel outside of the Czechoslovakia, what it was then. And we had a grand piano in the apartment that was hers, and she'd come and visit. And that's some of my earliest memories were just improvising on the piano with her, just making up tunes, basically. It was more about making up stories, actually, because you're a little kid, and it's sort of, music just sort of enables that. And it just kind of spiraled from there, really. It's funny. I consider myself very lucky because I've really never wanted to do anything else. So as far back as I can remember, that's all I've ever wanted to do.
Did music come naturally, or did you really have to give it your all in practice?
Oh man, everybody has to practice. Still have to practice.
You meet some people that would tell you otherwise.
well, I mean, there are those lucky bastards that don't have to practice quite as much. Maybe I don't know who they are. I don't know one person who's successful, but who's great and working at that sort of level, whether they're a musician or a composer or whatever, that did not bust their ass for a very, very long time at it. Mm-hmm. And that definitely includes me.
How did this all bring you to Hollywood?
Well, funnily enough, coming to Hollywood had nothing to do with my plans for music or my career or anything, actually. I came here to be with my now wife, and I was sort of, it was for life reasons. It was because I wanted to be with her. I didn't actually know anybody here. I just thought, I can give it a shot and figure it out and whatever. It's just, I sort of wasn't thinking about music for the first time in pretty much my whole life. So I came out here and I had a deal with EMI at the time as a solo artist, and I was doing some stuff. I was doing some recording here, and I think sort of by osmosis, if you arrive in Hollywood, I think maybe you end up involved in movies sooner or later. But the other thing was, and it was funny because I was having this conversation with Marty Noxon yesterday. Marty, who's the creator of Dietland, and it's like the fourth thing I've worked on with her. We were talking about our love for Martin Scorsese's movies, and we were actually particularly talking about a movie called After Hours, which came out in the 80s. And I was just saying, it's funny how I loved movies so much at the time, and I didn't realize why or sort of how that was informing my choices in music. And I think sort of roundabout when I started getting into scoring films, it all clicked, and it was like, oh, that's what that was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you're watching a film, do you kind of subconsciously start listening more intently to the music, or?
You mean? Well, I mean, I try not to. I try not to go in to a movie theater having paid you whatever it is for a ticket and go, I'm going to study this as a filmmaker. It's like, screw that. That's not why I make films. I mean, I make films so that people can enjoy them, and that doesn't sound enjoyable at all. I'd much rather go in and try and take the film at face value and let it do what it's going to do to me. That's sort of the point. Films, music, art, these are all supposed to be emotional things. So I try not to intellectualize it too much. That said, I mean, it's sort of impossible for me not to a certain extent, because, of course I know this. It's what I do.
Yeah.
But I try not to sort of sit there deconstructing, what the composer's doing. I try to, and the best films really just lead you in, and you almost, it's not that you don't notice the individual elements. Like when you come back, you notice, maybe a great score or great cinematography or whatever. but hopefully you're just so overtaken by the story in a really great movie that, none of those things, all those things create something more than the sum of the parts.
Is there a particular score or piece of music that is is kind of your go-to for your inspiration, or something just to make you feel good on a bad day?
Not necessarily a film score. I mean, there are many film scores that, I love. I mean, I'm certainly not alone in being a huge fan of Bernard Herrmann, and I think there are plenty of composers around now who I think do amazing work. But particularly when I'm writing, I sort of try and stay away from film scores a little bit, because I kind of feel like you're never going to break any boundaries. If all you're taking in is film music, then, how are you going to bring something new to the table? So I try not to do that. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I love sort of getting in the car on the way to the studio in the morning and just, setting iTunes to random and seeing what turns up. You're probably more likely to find me listening to, Rage Against the Machine or Stravinsky than a film score. When I listen to film scores, it's almost out of fascination. It's not that there aren't film scores that I absolutely love, but it's a sort of a fascination with problem solving in a way, because that's sort of what film scoring is, I think, in a sense. You're telling stories, but you're also having to negotiate dramatic problems and figure out how to make them work, or how to elevate them and draw the viewer into I guess tricking them into not realizing they're watching a movie. You know what I mean?
When you start that creative process for, say, a movie, what's the kickoff meeting like between you and the director and the producer to score the film?
Man, it really depends. Everyone has their sort of own style. There are times that, I scored a movie last year that I was brought in 2 weeks before the final mix, and it was, I think, an hour and a half or something of action music. And, in those sorts of situations, you just dive in and you use every tool at your disposal. But the best situations really are when there's a conversation with the director at the beginning, and they sort of say, look, here's what the story is. It may be before they've even started filming. Sometimes before even there's a finished script. The directors I've worked with a few times who we sort of just have a discussion about what's the story, who are the characters, why are they doing what they're doing. And in some senses, that's enough for me to sort of, go and start writing something. And you have to understand in the sort of process of writing a film score, when the time allows for it, I throw out tons and tons and tons of stuff, because I think you have to sort of try and push the boat out and sneak out on the ledge a bit and sort of and fall off kind of deliberately. To get it wrong, in order to get it right eventually, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah. Is it pretty difficult when, say, you're scoring something like Empire, and you're trying to tell a story with a character who's constantly evolving throughout the series? Is it difficult to keep telling that story, but keep harking back to the connection we had before with that character, music-wise?
It can be. It can be challenging in a very, very different way to film. It's sort of, when I first started doing TV, I would sort of think of it as a very, very long movie, and I suppose that is a way to think of it. But a show like Empire, actually, I just found out like an hour ago, got picked up for season 5.
Oh, awesome.
And so that means 5 years of it's a 5-year-long movie. That's a long movie. And so you sort of have to, it can't just be about harkening back to old themes. I mean, yes, themes are a very, very important thread, and I think palette and texture is a very, very important thread. You want people to feel like they're watching the same show, and I think if the show suddenly took a U-turn and went from being an orchestral score to a purely, modular synth score or something, people would just wonder what the fuck had just hit them. They'd notice that, and I think that that would take you out of the story. But at the same time, you have to find a way to sort of keep moving the ball down the field and moving forward. So I think themes help you with that in a sense, because themes can evolve themselves, the melodies can evolve. It's interesting, as we just literally wrapped the season finale for Fall last night. I was scoring it at Fox, and I stood in front of the orchestra and I thought, hold on, this orchestra's like doubled in size since we started. It's grown, bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's not really any indication of a score growing, but it's interesting how subconsciously you start making choices. In the case of Empire, it's a melodrama in some senses, and in other senses, it can be very real in places. So, we started with this very sort of old world movie ethic, and it's evolved. It's become something else. In some places, much more minimalist, and in other places, if you're going to turn it on, then you really have to turn it on. So we had fun yesterday. We had not like a huge orchestra, but like 60 people on the stage, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun, actually.
Speaking of experimenting, if let's say you had like free reign on something, say a film,
right.
what kind of experimenting would you do with the score to explore areas that haven't been touched before in music?
I mean, I think you always have free reign in a sense. Not free reign in the sense of unlimited budget or I mean, I actually think those things can hurt you sometimes. I think you need to. Limitations aren't necessarily a horrible thing. I think they're not a good thing if someone comes up to you and says, what I really think this should be is a symphonic score, with just orchestra, and then here's $20,000 to do it. Well, then that's when you have to start cutting corners and going, okay, well, maybe we should think of something else. But that's in a sense why a budget should never really be a limitation. It's like, well, okay, we can't afford an orchestra. What about, let's find some sounds that haven't been made before, and let's find some, instruments that didn't exist before, or let's find combinations of instruments that really don't belong together and see what happens. And, that can be a sort of catalyst for something. I mean, Dietland's been really interesting in that way because, and this sort of goes back to your question about how conversations start with the director sometimes too. Marty and I started talking about the script very early on, and I sort of went out and did some experiments, and it's amazing. With some directors, you just have this sort of, Marty calls it mind melding. I don't know what I call it, but it's just sort of knowing that initial scary thing of, oh God, I'm going to play the director my music for the very first time. I hope they don't hate it. With Marty, I remember the first email I got back, it said something along the lines of, "You are my musical spirit animal." which is, sort of a heartening thing to hear. That didn't mean we'd nailed it, but it meant we were onto something. And we had a lot of conversations, and sometimes actually that first draft of just me going, look, I'm going to lock myself in a room for a month and just chuck paint at the wall. I'll see you in a few weeks, and let's listen to some stuff and let's talk. Because it's all very well intellectualizing music, but music is feeling. Music is emotion, and you can't intellectualize emotion and feel it at the same time. So, it's all very well me saying, well, it's going to be a string quartet being chucked down a chimney and set on fire, or but you can only say, well, that sounds great, but what does it sound like? So we started having these conversations about the sort of tribal nature of living, of the tribal nature of humans, that from the very earliest times till now, the way Marty described it, everybody finds their tribes of men, women, fat, thin, everything, sort of these things we have to protect ourselves in a way. I like this kind of music. I like that kind of music. I like, people become very tribal about almost everything. Mm-hmm. And when she first explained it to me, it was, we both kind of went, tribal. I mean, that has some very, in some ways, that has some very corny connotations in terms of music. Mm-hmm. But then we started to sort of explore just the idea. It was really the idea of very primitive musical ideas, very primitive percussion, and very sort of visceral, almost bloody sounds, mixed with, and then somehow that got mixed with this whole, I really went down the rabbit hole with modular synthesis. There is a world out there where there's some incredible artists that you can find all over Instagram that literally just are up to their necks in modular synth gear, just creating. It's really one of the few places I've seen music being created for the sake of just music. Mm-hmm. There doesn't seem to be a particular agenda in, like, we're putting out an album, we're going on tour. It was just sort of people fascinated with these instruments and what they could do with it. And it really, really inspired me to dive into that world. And suddenly we had this combination of those two worlds, and then I started writing for a string quartet. And I, again, like, I'm explaining this to you now and thinking, shit, this sounds so hokey. It's like, oh, we took a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. But I swear to God, it just turned into something. It became its own sound. And that's ultimately what I think film school should do. You sort of shouldn't be afraid to go down the rabbit hole. You should just, follow it. And if you hit a brick wall, great. You can always come back and go down another one. But that's really what we did with Dietland, and it's, it's worked. It's a really, and I think it's a brilliant show. I cannot wait for people to see it.
What's been some of the most rewarding music that you've created?
Well, Dietland for one. I'm kind of in the middle of that now, getting towards the end of the series. That's just been, it's one of those situations where everybody on the crew just knows they're involved in something special. And, I cannot speak to whether it's going to be successful or not. Nobody knows that. You never know that. You sort of hope it is, but, you have no idea. But we really, really, truly believe in the stories we're telling and the characters we're putting out there. And, and everybody from the focus puller to Marty is just, they know they're on something that they really believe in. So that's been great. I mean, musically, there's a movie I did towards the end of last year that just came out called The Titan, which I had a really great time writing the score for. That again was sort of another deep dive into modular synths, but I also recorded it with a chamber orchestra at Abbey Road in London, and that turned out to be a really sort of profound musical experience, not least of all because it was actually, the recording session at Abbey was the last time I actually saw my grandmother before she passed away. She was the grandmother that I, started learning music with when I was very, very young. She passed away last year at 101. She was a violinist and a piano player and a music therapist. And so that was a pretty profound musical experience. Now, she'd recorded at Abbey Road at the end of the Second World War with a chamber orchestra. I think they did St. Matthew's Passion. And she came there and watched me conduct the score to Titan, and it was actually the last time we saw each other. So that was a musical memory I think I'll I'll never lose.
That I actually cannot I cannot top that question. That wow. I can't imagine performing something and seeing your loved one for the last time. That's
and of course you don't know. I mean, and she was 101 at the time, so it's always in the back of your mind. How much more time do we have together and all of that kind of stuff. But at the time, it was just a beautiful thing because she was standing in a room where she'd recorded, decades ago. And she'd had an entire musical career in London, and it was pretty humbling to be standing there, performing the music in front of her. And not only had she taught me, but her musical education was incredible. She studied with Gustav Holst. Wow. She was a serious musician. She knew more about music than I'll probably ever know. But yeah, that was pretty incredible.
What would be some of your advice for those aspiring musicians, like the ones we're seeing now on YouTube and Instagram, that want to make that move towards a Hollywood career? What would be your advice for those people?
Hollywood career meaning scoring films? Yes. I mean, there's lots of practical advice, and that's a bit difficult to go into in one short question. You could say meet directors and, hang out at film festivals or whatever. But I think it's much more about being compelled in the same way that you were compelled to make music in the first place. I always used to think that I was a little bit lazy and selfish about the things that I pursued. And I realized as I got older that, and I was thinking, well, hang on a minute, I can't be lazy. I work 18 hours a day most days. But I am specifically working on something that I'm very much in love with. And I would find it hard to put that kind of time into something that I didn't have that kind of passion for. And that's really what not only gets you into it, but it's what gets you through it, because it is incredibly challenging and tough. It's tough on your relationships. It's tough on your health. It's tough on, on just your life, because it eats up swathes of time. And there's all the things that everybody tells you about in the music business, rejection and blah, 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 and whatever. Life's hard, boo-hoo.
Stuff that comes with the territory.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you somehow don't notice that, now if someone like me is giving you that speech when you're a musician starting out, and I very memorably had that speech from a music teacher when I was quite young, who gave me the sort of, you'll probably die of a drug overdose, broken, some horrible flat in London, or you probably won't make it. But then if you just heard what I said and you went, whatever, or just ignored it, or just thought, well, no, I won't, then maybe you're a musician, maybe. So that's the kind of advice I would give to, whether you're a musician or you want to get into film or whatever, you absolutely have to do it, not want to do it. You have to do it. You have to get up every morning and make movies. Then that's what you should do. And under no circumstances should you do it if you feel any other way.
I completely agree. I know we're kind of short on time, Phil, but for those people that want to know more about you or hear some samples of your music, where can people go to get that information?
Oh, the internet, I hear, is a very, very plentiful place. I have stuff on iTunes and Spotify and all over the place. The Titan soundtrack is out. I just did Melissa McCarthy's movie, which is coming out, I believe, May 11th, called Life of the Party. That's just come out through Varese Saraband, the soundtrack. Dietland will be, when does that start? June 4th, I believe, on AMC. So. And I did a movie at Sony called Proud Mary at the end of last year. That's out there. There's a lot of music out there. I would actually love to point people towards one thing. I did a film that I'm very, very proud of a year and a bit ago, called Newtown. I didn't do it alone. I did it with I think it was, I've lost count now, but I think it was 17 other composer friends of mine,
Wow.
including Blake Neely and Jeff Danner and Jeff Beal, and some really great composers. It's a film about sort of the fallout of the Sandy Hook shooting, and the really it's a sort of I suppose a sort of a study of grief and the effect that this kind of violence has on communities in the long run. And I was involved with some very just some amazing people on it, and we put together a soundtrack, all of the profits of which are going to the charity that they've set up, which is sort of an outreach campaign. There, I guess they call it an impact campaign. They're traveling around the country with the film and starting town halls and discussions about gun violence, and that's something I feel very, very passionately about. The film actually just won a Peabody Award last week, and which they're going to be presented with on the 19th. And that score came out on Lakeshore Records quite recently. So if you're going to check out anything, I would say go get that, because it's for a good cause. All
right. Thank you very much, Phil. I appreciate you taking time out of your day today to speak to us about your work and the impact that it has on people. Because I know personally, music is the thing I go to for everything, for emotional support, for inspiration, and people like you that put together such beautiful music are just get me through my day, and I'm sure. A lot of other
thank
people
you,
too.
Thank you. Well, that is a beautiful thing, and that's basically why I make music, because it makes me feel exactly the same way. I completely sympathise with you. Empathise. I don't know what the right word is, but that doesn't sound right. But yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and you have yourself a good day, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, you too, man. Bye.
All right, bye.